Hi folks, welcome to a thrilling new episode of Cyber Narratives. I'm your host, Mathieu Cyber Dr. Peteau, and today we have Jane Frankland, who's here to talk with us about the engagement we have in cybersecurity, and particularly the place that women have within this male-dominated field, and how we can include them, and what will be the benefits for companies to include more women in the field. Jane, welcome to Cyber Narratives.
Hi, it's so good to be here. Bonjour.
Bonjour, indeed. Jane, great having you. You're the author of a wonderful book called Insecurity: Why Failure to Attract Women and Retain Women in Cybersecurity is Making Us All Less Safe. So you initially wrote this book in 2017. There was a totally different context, and we'll see how the differences are moving from the past to the present, what has changed, what hasn't, and what can we do to make us all safer. So first question, Jane, I'd like to get an understanding. Why is it that we are failing to attract women, and especially why does it make us less safe?
Yeah, big questions. Well, my view on why we're failing to attract and retain women is really down to two things. One is the way that we are recruiting, and there's bias still within those recruiting processes. Sometimes they're quite dysfunctional. And then the other reason why we're not retaining is really down to culture. It's down to the way that we are operating, the way that we are working our people. And when it comes to retaining women in particular, I view women as being the canaries in the cage. What's good for women is good for men. And if you're seeing women leave, you can bet that men are going to leave too. It's just that the women will leave ahead of. So they're useful in that perspective, but really, in my view, it comes down to those two elements.
And so why is it not making us, why is the lack of women in the field making us less safe?
Because women see risk in a different way to men. And it's not that women are less likely to take risks. It's just that they can be more accurate when they are dealing with risk. And what I find really interesting is, there's lots of data around that. There are hundreds and hundreds of resources, white papers that you can access. But it's the World Economic Forum. If you go to the World Economic Forum and you look at risk, then you can see that they are tracking it in terms of gender. And it's really interesting to see, well, here's the male view, here's the female view, and then here's the overall view. So, for me, it's like, well, if that wasn't the case, then why would, such a celebrated and important organization like the World Economic Forum be tracking it? So women see risk in a different way to men. And if we are not attracting and retaining more women in our field, which is all about how we evaluate risk and the decisions that we make around it, specifically cyber, then we are all thinking in the same way, and we are not doing as good a job as we could do.
Mm-hmm. And so, to point out the example from the World Economic Forum, are women better making predictions then, from what you've seen?
No, well, I mean, there are research papers that will say that women are more accurate when you're looking at risk. So they exist. But for me, like looking at this, it's not that one is better than the other. It's that when we come together, we are better. So here's a risk landscape, a view, a perspective over here for the men. Here's what it is for the women. It's somewhere in between. It's the range. So we can be accurate by having a range. And if there are differences in perspective down to the genders, then we can just do a better job. And like I said, there are more research papers out there. There are very few that are specific to women, but there are some that have looked at risk. And there's one in particular that I sometimes refer to. And this research study that was done looked at whether it was gender or whether it was diversity, and what the study showed. And this was interesting to me because I didn't actually expect it. But it actually showed that it was down to gender. You got a more accurate perspective and cost savings, a better view on risk when you had more women leaders in these positions, as opposed to more diversity. So whether that's gender, whether it's age, whether it's experience, and
Sexual orientation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit. There's been research actually to the 1960s, the wisdom of the crowd, that
Yes.
we all come in with different perspectives, and at the end,
Yeah.
we're able to guess the bull's weight. So yeah,
Yes.
for those who don't know, the story is a scientist that wanted to ask the weight of an ox. Now that I think about it, and in the end, one person might be wrong, but the accumulative knowledge of everyone made it that it was much wiser. So I think here we're obviously facing. Well, we're seeing something that's similar in this position. So, okay, the lack of women is definitely making us less safe. Now, let's talk a bit more about the struggles that women are facing. Can you perhaps share some things that you or other females are struggling? Why is it that we have so few women in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, there's bias that goes on. So there's unconscious bias. So people not intentionally going out to be biased, but we're all naturally biased. It's what's kept us safe. It's what's kept us evolving as a species, for all these years. So there are biased moves, biased decisions and practices that are occurring that are limiting minorities, such as women. Those happen at the recruitment phase and also during the career progression kind of phases. And one of the things that I see quite a lot of are women being held back. So women will invariably work twice as hard as a man. They feel that they need to. They will tell each other, you are going to have to. You need to do that in order to progress. So that goes on, which can lead to burnout. It can lead to stress, it can lead to illness, it can lead to burnout. It can lead us to women leaving the industry and feeling like they don't belong there. And so that goes on. You've got that whole kind of like cultural aspect, and you've got that way of being with women in the workplace, feeling that they have to, not necessarily having to, but feeling like they do in order to progress. The other thing that happens, and this is in terms of promotion, and it is in accordance most often with bias, women aren't progressing in their roles fast enough. So they are being held back. They are having to prove themselves to be competent much more than men. And again, there's been a lot of studies, not in cyber, about that, outside of cyber. Definitely the confidence aspect, the confidence code, the book that was written by two remarkable journalists, media personalities. It was incredible, really insightful. So those things go on. And because if women aren't progressing and they're seeing their male peers progressing, getting maybe paid more, the salary gap, pay structure, and it's really limiting for women. It exists. There's a wide gap there. They're seeing that. They know about it. Then that is the fastest way to get rid of a woman. And there's a story in the book that I wrote about. I remember interviewing a leader in the UK, in London, at an insurance company. And he said he recruited incredible women for his team from the organization. But when he noticed that she was being severely underpaid, in terms of her level. And so he said to HR, I want this woman, she's amazing, but we're going to have to sort out her pay. She needs to be paid this amount. HR kicked off and said, absolutely no, that means she's jumping, certain pay grades. And he literally pushed back and he said, she's been underpaid for years. If you do not do this, then I'm going to call it out as a diversity issue. Thank goodness that they did enable him to pay her the pay grade that she was, she really was at. They didn't backdate her pay for all the years that she'd been underpaid and exploited at that company. But thankfully, he, that was an action that an ally, an advocate, could take when he saw an injustice. So it's practices like that are really holding women back or causing women to leave the industry. Mm-hmm. It's unfair practices. It's exploitation. It's demanding more from women than maybe would be demanded from men.
Yeah. And you pointed out in recruitment examples, for instance, where penetration testing, you've seen that there was 2 different exams for male and women because women need to prove themselves more. So typically this would be an example of such a situation.
Absolutely, completely. I mean, all of these things go on. In the larger companies, there tend to be less instances like that, but in the smaller companies, they can go on. I mean, another example I came across, after writing the book, was whereby our company had gone out, they were recruiting entry-level candidates, and they were doing a test online. And what happened, they had more men succeed in this particular test than women. And it was there was almost like an unwritten rule that the women thought existed. And this demonstrates potentially a woman's natural disposition to comply, which is probably down to the way that we have been brought up. And I say we so generally, but we as women have typically been brought up to comply, to conform, to follow the rules, typically. And so in this instance, this exam had gone out, and the guys, when they didn't understand the question, they were using their phones, Googling it, being really resourceful to find the answer. The women believed that they couldn't do that. If they didn't know the answer, they couldn't cheat, because that was invariably what it would amount to. That's cheating. I don't know the answer, so therefore I can't answer it. Next question. Whereas the guys, they hadn't been told that. They hadn't been told that they couldn't do that. So we're just like, yeah, okay. I mean, there was no chat GPT at that time, but it would be like using whatever resource that they could. Now that was a failure really in terms of the way that exam was being delivered, and not understanding that women may be more compliant and may be working in that way. If the examiner had gone out and said, look, you can be as resourceful as you want, there aren't any restrictions here, then they would have got a different result. But they didn't do that because they didn't understand, because they were men, and they didn't understand. They didn't understand like how it works, how it can work. So it's being as clear as you can, understanding the differences between the genders, and in some cases the sexes as well, how we operate, culturally, and how we are wired.
But a challenge for this, I think, is just, we don't think about those things. We just say, the results are better for men because men are better. You just simplify it like this without diving further.
This is it, and this is where diversity really excels, because this is where we're blindsided. So wasn't it Einstein who said, if we're all thinking the same, are we actually thinking? And it's not just a case of gender. Okay, I wrote my book about women, at a time when it was women were craving something like this. I mean, the feedback I got from the book, from women, the amount of thanks, the amount of gratitude, some of the feedback from the older women was, I get really angry reading this book that we are still in this position, and it ignites the anger. Why are we still here? Younger women felt very inspired. Collectively, women felt more united, less alone. It's not just me. I thought it was just me. I thought it was my problem. I thought I was the only one, as opposed to like when this book came out at that time, it was like, I'm not alone. It's like it was before the Me Too movement, but it was a Me Too, and that helped because it helped to keep women in, and it helped women to realize that they are of value and they do belong here, and we need them, and also a lot of men as well. It helped to educate a lot of men. It helped with understanding without making it wrong.
Yeah, I think so too. For me, it was also eye-opening. I consider myself a feminist. When I read the book, there were so many things that I didn't realize that I was doing that could be considered discriminatory. So perhaps can you give us some examples of things that might seem like regular or that anodyne, but that we do as males that are keeping the females out of the cybersecurity workforce?
Well, I'll give you one funny example. I'll give you a little story. So much of the time, guys will come and they will say, when you're talking about this topic, I know a woman. I know a woman, and she's amazing. She's incredible. She's so brilliant, and they are so so gushy about these women. And it's just like, she's amazing. She does this, and they can't wait to tell me. And sometimes, I remember this one time where one guy was like this, I worked with a woman, she was amazing, she did this, that, and the other. And she was even a mom. And literally, I just got to the point where I thought, I have to write about this. I can't tolerate this anymore, because it was a man who was like trying to support, and being really excited about, this, and wanting more women in the industry. Most guys do want more women in the industry because it's more normal, it's more healthy, it's more fun. But in this instance, I kind of turned it around, and I created this little picture, this image, which was of a woman. And my post was, I once worked with a man in cyber. He was absolutely even despite being a father.
Yeah.
It was just like humor to illustrate a point. And what was funny was, like, lots of women were like, oh, that's hilarious. Some guys were like, oh my God, that's hilarious. Now I get it. And then some guys, took it seriously and answered it, as in like, thanks, thanks for recognizing, I'm a father too, and I struggle with this whole thing. We need to do better. The numbers aren't increasing. We're standing still, if not going backwards. And so the interventions, if they still exist, aren't working as effectively as we need them to be. We're not doing better. So we have to really pay attention to this and invest in it, and do a better job if we're to get more women into male-dominated industries like cyber and remain in it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And for industry leaders that are looking to measure the discrepancies of women in the industry, what kind of measures would you recommend them to look at in order to see if women are doing well?
Well, I think one of the first places that you need to start is to actually find a way to check in with the women in your team. Whether that is you, because there are plenty of leaders out there, and some have larger teams, but there are plenty of leaders out there who don't check in, with their team full stop, let alone their women. I know when I've gone into companies, one of the first jobs that I'll do is go and speak to the women, like, earn their trust and make them feel comfortable talking to me and actually finding out, well, what's going on? How good is it for you here? What's being done well? And what could be improved? That's the first place. And often when you go and do that qualitative, research, then you are getting more information. You're able to find usually the root cause of the problem, as opposed to looking at other, quantitative data and actually looking at the numbers. The numbers will tell you a story. You have to go and speak, to the women and find out, well, what's going on? Where's the struggle? That's where you're going to uncover the juice. So that's where I like to start. And then to look at whether or not a company has got a hiring issue or whether it's got a retention issue or whether it's got both. So where's the problem, and what practices can be and processes, what could be improved? What do you need to do in order to improve this situation? So sometimes you'll find that things just aren't being tracked at all. So for me, I tend to look at these things as a business would, as a campaign manager would. Well, if you're looking at hiring, what are your messages? How good are your messages? What's the text like? What are the images like? Are you being inclusive? Are you being specific? So you can look at like gendered language and things like that and follow that through with images. But then you can look at how many applicants are we attracting? And then what's the conversion rate through to hiring? A lot of that is kind of like missed, so they will look at a fraction of that. Well, if you don't know how many applicants you're attracting, then you're kind of like missing an important stage out of that. I've gone into companies where they're just not tracking that, or they're not tracking it by gender. But there are agencies, recruitment agencies out there that don't track their candidates on gender. And there are certain reasons why they don't do that. But if someone is coming to you and saying, we want to improve our gender diversity, then it's so much easier if you're dealing with a recruitment company who can segregate that data and actually go to their candidates and say there's an opportunity here that you could be interested, and actually then provide that organization with equal numbers of men and women. But nowadays it's, really what we're talking about are all genders, so being inclusive, full stop.
There's a question, though, that I have based on this, because in the book you described that an orchestra that tested, having musicians play behind a hidden door so that you wouldn't be able to see their faces, and have seen better results. So wouldn't tracking the gender of applicants go against them, and we end up with even more bias because we know that they're a woman or they're a man?
It could do, but this comes down to testing. So there are, for me, there are tools that I would advocate you use, which actually work on that blind hiring basis. So it removes it. So what you're getting, you're asking questions in regard to someone's suitability to do that role, as opposed to what gender are you, what's your age group, what's your ethnicity, and so on. You're already, within those tools that I would recommend, you're already capturing that, and you can see if there's a problem. So you can see if you are not getting enough applicants that meet, one of those categories. Well, we don't have enough women applying for this role. They're not coming through. So you can see where the problem is. So I would always advocate that you would use a tool such as that to eliminate these things by design, so that you are getting the right person through, as opposed to doing something which is quite simplified, which would be a case which is mostly used by hiring managers. And in fact, a lot of hiring managers, if they're trying to improve their diversity, will go out to recruitment consultants and say, find me a woman, which you can't do. Certainly in the UK, you can't do. It's legally, you're not allowed to do that. But practice still goes on. So yes, my preferred way is to use a tool which is inclusive and actually attracts a diverse range of talent or candidates, people, call them whatever you want, who are suitable to do that role, so that you're not having to use substandard processes.
Jane, we've talked a lot about the recruitment process and how we can incorporate more females into our candidate pool and eventually hiring them. Now, there's another question which we know is happening, and we've talked about it, is the retention of these women. What can we do out there to help women feel better, stay longer at businesses?
Yeah, well, we can certainly speak to our women and make sure that we understand, what's going on in their world. One thing that I found when I've gone into companies is a lot of the time the people are within those teams are not aware of what they have to do in order to be promoted. So that problem came out of speaking to women and actually asking them, do you know what is involved in order for you to progress to the next stage, in order for you to get your promotion? And they didn't. And it's basic, so literally that's one thing that we can actually ascertain. It's like, do you understand? And you don't have to make it gender specific. It's people specific. People, do you understand what you have to do in order to progress to the next level, in order to make your promotion? And it's surprising what can come from that. But that's a starting point. And again, not making it specific, it's inclusive. This is relevant for all people. But that's something that I found a lot of the time when I have gone into these organizations. It's like they don't understand. And that's quick to solve because you can do an hour workshop, or an hour presentation. You could even do like a video and get it out to people and say, here's what you have to do. Here's how we're measuring you. And then that's clear. Well, these are the timescales that we expect you to move through. Here's how you're going to be evaluated. So that, I think, really needs to be made clearer. And of course, you don't have to wait for that, as whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether you're in between genders, whatever, you don't have to wait for that. You can go to your line manager, and if people, in this case, let's talk about women, go into these organizations and they are just left to get on with it. Make this job your own, find your own way. And it's high challenge, it's high pressure. That's what our environment of cyber is like. We have to be fast. We have to be able to deliver high quality. And so they're just thrown in at the deep end, and they are left to figure it out. And by figuring it out, they're either going to sink or they're going to swim. If they swim, then they've learned their own methods, and you're not going to have a standard procedure, a standard model for how you build teams, successful, high performance teams. It's going to be different for each one. So it's far better to actually have a methodology that you can train others in and is repeatable, because then you can ensure that you're going to get higher performance each time, as opposed to it being random. If they sink, then they're going to leave. They're going to burn out. They're going to be stressed. They're going to go, this isn't for me. I'm leaving. So you've then got your churn. So it's far better to create these environments of high challenge where it is challenging. You're going to challenge as a leader, but you're also going to support and equip in the same dose. If you get one of those out of sync, if you're too high challenge and too low support, it might work, but you're not going to get something that's repeatable, or it might not. So you're going to get people leaving. If it's too much the other way, so high support, low challenge, you're going to get a really dependent workforce who are looking to you as a leader, who will be asking you, what do I do? They'll be unsure about what they do. They're not going to be self-directing. So then you're going to create a culture that is resistant to change. And of course, in security, we don't like change. Well, as human beings, we don't like change anyway. We're wired not to. It introduces risk. But in cyber, we hate change because there's more risk. But we need it because we're working with a business who is innovating, and we're working in technology, and that's innovation. So we have to create these cultures of high challenge and high support. We have to have that mindset so we are equipped to build a pipeline of top talent that are coming to us, saying, oh my God, I want to work with you as a leader. I want to work in your company. It's amazing. I'm going to refer people to you once I'm in your company. So you're creating advocates, ambassadors, and this brilliant pipeline, because you're stepping up as a leader and equipping your team to be able to perform, with this challenging environment.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's evolving for sure, and we have to make sure that we keep up to date.
Yeah.
So we've talked about retention, of course. I'm making sure that women have a clear path, and even employees are feeling good and are feeling supported. This is very important. Now, another more specific thing that you talked about in the book was around pregnancies, and how women who get pregnant have struggled very much to come back to their employers and oftentimes end up leaving, while males, even though when they go on paternity leave, have little consequences. So can you talk more about what's going on and perhaps how companies can solve it?
Yeah, well, again, it's checking in with the women, so making your understanding of them. For women, it's coming back, and I've seen this happen. Sometimes they're still feeding, especially with a remote culture that we have, a hybrid culture that we have now since the pandemic, remote working. Sometimes they're exhausted from feeding, breastfeeding. Sometimes they're exhausted from having to get up in the night, and often what happens is the actual caring for the babies falls more on the women than the man. Sometimes that can be just how they organize it as parents. So often what can happen, what I've seen happen, is that women are not, this is not allowed for. Sometimes when a woman goes back to work, her hormones can be all over the place, her sleep schedule can be all over the place, yet she's having to work in the same way as everyone else. Mm-hmm. And if she's come back to work from having worked twice as hard as her male peers before, then sometimes she's judged on that. And sometimes it can be a case of, say it was me, it's just like, oh my God, Jane's come back and like, wow, she's not as good as she was, you know, or whatever. And it could have been that, well, I didn't have kids before, and, you know, I was working all hours, you know, and the thing is, like, in regard to that, a lot of the times the leaders aren't necessarily aware that you're putting in that time. You know, and I know this happens particularly with younger employees, you know, whether they're women or whether they are neurodivergent. You know, I'm thinking of one woman I know in particular who works most weekends, and she will work 8 or 9 o'clock way through till 11 o'clock. You know, she's been at burnout so many times. It is just ridiculous. And she is neurodivergent. She feels she has to work harder to prove herself in order to make the promotion that she wants within a specific time. So she's working above and beyond. She doesn't have children. So if she were to fall pregnant now, chances would be that she would not be working to the same capacity. But her line manager doesn't know that she's working all those hours. And he, I think she's got a few line managers. One is a male, one is a female. Neither of them know that. She doesn't feel safe to disclose that because she feels she'll be judged. She will feel that they will look at her and say, well, you're not up to the job. If you're working those hours, you're not up to the job. That might happen. Or they could say, well, you need to do those hours if you're working here. So if she comes back having had her child, even though the maternity, paternity, parental policy will be superb, she will feel more judged. She will feel more exposed. She will feel less safe because she will be judged in accordance with her fellow peers, all genders, and also her performance prior to leaving. So this is why a lot of the time it's like you as a leader need to check in with your team, or what's really going on. And you need to be doing as much as you can, given that the culture and organization that you can to support your people. You have to be on top of that. For some companies, it will be a case of, well, this is just the culture of it. I don't agree with that. I mean, I've worked at places like that, and I've shielded my team from that and done whatever I can in order to protect them and ensure that they're not having to work in that manner. But sometimes there's only so much that you can do, because in some of those companies, it's a case of, well, this is the culture. This is how we work. If you don't want to work in that way, there's the door. If you are working like that, because you can be setting yourself up for failure. It has to be sustainable. Your work has to be sustainable. You know, yes, you can put in like hours and hours of work for a short period, but if you do it for a long period, then it's just, you're either going to burn out or you're going to be ill. And usually it's illness that takes you out, you know, you know, so, and that's not where you want to be. We want sustainability. You know,
it makes sense.
You want performance. You want good decisions. If that is happening, you're burning out, you can't think as well, you're going to be slower, you're going to be making worse decisions, you're not going to be evaluating risk as accurately as you can.
For sure. If you're not rested, and as you say, there's more. It goes back to what we said at the beginning. There's more pressure on girls and ladies to perform. We're looking at them more, especially when they come back from pregnancy and if they're tired from the pregnancy. They have a baby to take care of. Maybe I'm explaining things you already know, but there's a lot, and then when everything comes together, of course, it puts them on pressure. So the question is here: if you're a CISO or even a CEO, and you want your company to be more welcoming, to be more aware of these issues and cultivate a culture of acceptance, what are some things you can do to make sure that there's more acceptance for females.
I mean, it depends on your organization, how big you are. You can set up groups. I've worked at companies where they've had fantastic groups for lots of different kind of situations. It could be like a diversity group or a gender group or a mother's group. So they're all different kind of communities and groups that you can set up. But I think as a leader, you can lead by example, and you can share stories to make it acceptable and make sure that you're following through on those and not penalizing someone for it. So I'll give you a good example of that. Several of my female friends who are leaders will take that, and certainly I did this with my company. I had my babies with me when I was doing meetings. It was not with client. I would never do that. But if they were supplier meetings, sometimes my kids were around. And that was a way of doing business. I had to do that in order to get business done. The suppliers were pitching to me, not the other way around. So I was able to do that. But I know that some of my other female leader friends have taken their babies with them. They might have taken them to do a presentation, not a paid presentation. That would be a different kettle of fish, but a presentation. Or they might have held a team meeting whilst their kids were around. So again, making it acceptable, making it normal. It's okay if you are on this meeting and you are having dinner with your kids, bathing your kids, whatever, that's okay. I'm doing it too. It's just really making it normal. And another example that I can give is sometimes by holding events at certain times, you are invariably excluding typically mothers. I was going to say parents, but typically it's mothers. So say, for example, if you're doing a breakfast meeting, maybe it's between the hours of 6 to 8. Well, a lot of moms can't do that. Maybe dads too, because they might be doing the school run. But you're going to exclude a lot of parents who are doing the school run, and that might typically be women. Again, if you're doing them it could be in the evenings, the same thing could happen. So I think it's really being aware and trying to set things up so that, one, you're showing that you are thinking about them and trying to find a way to be more inclusive so that the majority of the team are able to participate, as opposed to just not thinking about them and being blindsided. It's coming back to, well, it didn't occur to me because I've never had to do that. I don't do it, or my wife does it, so it's trying to be more considerate. And obviously you've got to get business done. You're not going to be able to please everyone. But I think if you can demonstrate that as a leader by example, and you can share stories and make it more normal and make your people, your team feel safe to operate to their highest level, then you're going to do better.
Yeah. I think it's a perfect end to what we're saying now. Understanding and being present and taking them into consideration, the constraints of mothers and women in general. So
yeah, and it could also be, it's the carers as well. It's just like, it's not just a case of parents. It could be, a lot of, in particular, women are having to deal with their elderly parents. My dad's got dementia. His wife is no longer here. The brothers are like in a different country. It's down to me. I'm having to do, the drives over to make sure he's okay, or he's in the nursing home and there's been an issue. So it's being aware really of what is happening in your team's lives, or it could be, it doesn't have to be either of those scenarios. It could be a different scenario. But I think the more you're aware of what's going on, the more you try to be inclusive, to help, so that as many people within your team, or the whole of your team, can do well. They've got that opportunity, and your team know that you've got their back and you're trying to do what's right in order to help them be the best versions of themselves and perform, then the better you're going to do, as opposed to being quite dictatorial and uncaring.
Yeah. Oh, very, very good point. Jane, I want to move on from the say feminist part of you into more of let's say the cybersecurity visionary part of you. So I've prepared two questions from what you've done that I wanna get into. So the first one is something that I've read in your book, a quote. So it says, "Cybersecurity is all about changing how the world around us works." Can you please tell us what that means for you?
Well, it's about supporting business, isn't it? It's about supporting communities. And cybersecurity, or security in general, is something that is very natural to us. We're all making decisions, based on risk. So for us, the way that I see cyber is really, we need to be going out to our communities, to schools, to the people who live around us, and really help them to share, what is best practice, this cyber hygiene. How can we be more digitally secure with the tools that we're operating from an individual perspective, in our homes, all the way through to in our companies. So the more that we do that, the more that we evangelize, the safer and more digitally secure we are going to become. And then when you go into your organizations, if you have that interest, which I think all employees need to have, because the more that they can act as ambassadors and evangelists, the quicker we can spot attacks that are happening, the safer we can become, the fewer mistakes we're going to be making, not deliberately, but inadvertently in our organizations. And then obviously as cybersecurity practitioners, it's our job to go out there and defend, or, to find vulnerabilities to go on the offensive. So for us, really, I think that our planet depends upon us, in order to make the world safer and to help us evolve as human beings, because everything comes back to security. If you want to trade, if you want to operate in a world full of technology, you have to be aware of what is happening from a cyber perspective and ensure that you are as safe as you can be.
Mm-hmm. Make sure you take the right risk rewards decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you pointed out. Another thing, Jane, I noticed that on both social media, and the books that you've written, that you have a tendency to make parallels between personal life and cybersecurity, the things you see around cybersecurity. What can you tell us about how you read things, and what can we get as an audience as to how we can also see cybersecurity in different things that we do?
I think it's really engaging our brains, actually stopping to think about what it is that we're doing. So a lot of the time I see people moving with the crowd. And again, that's very natural, to keep up with the crowd, the herd, the community, the tribe, whatever, we follow it. But especially kind of having come from a different background, not a tech background, and I'm a challenger by nature, but I want to see more people using their brain. I want to see people thinking more, rather than just, it's like accepting the data, accepting a report, accepting a news feed. Is this true? Is this fake? Is it biased? Is it misinformation? Is it disinformation? So I really want people to be engaging their brains. We have brains, so let's engage them more, as opposed to not thinking. All of the decisions that we make around risk, we can apply to this. Is this true? How am I sure? Let's look at this another way. So it's about using our brains. It's about seeing things from a different perspective. It's about being open. It's about having a growth mindset, as opposed to being fixed and closed and definitive. It's like, let's be a little bit more open. Let's review, let's scrutinize, let's judge less, I think, and let's try and operate more collaboratively and sensitively than we do now. I think that would really, really help us in the way that we approach approach things, whether that's cyber or whether it's something else. So I think a lot of the things that I will do is about that. It's about seeing things from a different perspective. It's about opening your mind. It's about using your brain. Think about it, question it, have some fun with that, and let's not make people wrong with it. It's something that I say, no shame, no blame, just better business. Let's have that discussion. Because right now I think the world is at a really dangerous point. It's like we're waiting for a tinderbox, aren't we? It's just like, where's the match? It's all going to go up. It's really dangerous at the moment. It's very volatile.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this is why we need to be better, whether it's as business leaders or cybersecurity risk dealers. So yeah, Jane, thank you so much for being on Cyber Narratives. If people want to find out more about you, what you do, where can they go?
They can come to my website, which is jane-frankland.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn, which is, if you look for my name, Jane Frankland, then you'll find me.
Yeah, and all the marvelous posts that you do. Great, Jane. Thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day.